The year is 1914, and World War I had just started. The prolific science fiction author H. G. Wells published a novel called The World Set Free. Wells's book discussed the dangers of scientific advancement as humanity discovered a devastating new weapon. The novel is often overshadowed by his more famous works, which include War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. The World Set Free was arguably more significant than his previous books, for it coined the term atomic bomb. Keep in mind that this was over 3 decades before the first nuclear weapons were tested. The book would later inspire the greatest minds in the world to create the most powerful weapon in history. Little did H. G. Wells know that his warning about the dangers of human advancement would come true. On September 12, 1933, the theoretical physicist Leo Szilard was lounging in a hotel lobby. At the time, he was one of many Jewish refugees in London. While reading the Times, Szillard's eye was caught by the second column, a summary about Ernest Rutherford's speech on transforming atoms. Rutherford was a physicist made famous for his contributions to the recent discovery of the neutron. In his speech, he claimed that harnessing atomic energy was inefficient and impossible on an industrial scale. Szilard would later write his opinions about Rutherford's views on atomic power. Pronouncements of experts to the effect that something cannot be done have always irritated me. That's exactly how he said it. In other words, he disliked experts such as Rutherford determining for others what is or isn't possible. After finishing the article, Szilard left the hotel and went for a walk with no destination in mind. Reading the article had placed Szilard on a path to disprove Rutherford's moonshine talk. While walking through the streets of London, he stopped for a red light at the intersection of Southampton and Russell Square. When the light turned green, everything changed. By the time Szilard finished crossing, he had conceived an idea that would alter the course of human history. Scientists like Rutherford have been attempting to exploit the enormous energy inside the atom. They did this by bombarding an atom with alpha particles, which are also called helium nuclei. This process is tedious because the atom is mostly empty space. With every million alpha particles shot, only one hits the nucleus. To form the atom, the alpha particle must be added to the atom's nucleus. But because both the nucleus and alpha particle are positively charged, they repel one another. This is why Rutherford thought that atomic energy would be impossible. Szilard thought differently. It occurred to him that the recently discovered neutron would be a perfect probe to invade the nucleus. Neutrons aren't charged, which means they won't interact with the electrons that would otherwise block its path, and it wouldn't be repelled by the nucleus. Once a neutron enters a sufficiently large nucleus, the atom would split, expelling 2 or 3 more neutrons. The mass of the 2 new nuclei would be less than the amount of the original atoms. Mass is converted into energy when the atoms split. This principle directly relates to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. A small amount of mass multiplied by the speed of light squared will give you a lot of energy. If there are other atoms in the vicinity, then the 2 new neutrons could split those atoms as well. This means one atom can split 2, which then can split 4, then 8, and 16, and so on. Szilard would call it the nuclear reaction. The enormous energy released from every split atom could make a devastating weapon. The nuclear bombs from the book The World Set Free were now possible. This realization bothered Szilard. If such a device were to be built, the Germans had a good chance at being the first, and the Germans meant the Nazis. His fear followed him for 6 years until 1939. News from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute reached him. The German chemist Otto Hahn had split a uranium atom using a neutron, just as Szilard predicted. In 1938, Leo Szilard migrated to America. With the aid of Einstein, Szilard wrote a letter to President Roosevelt which urged him to fund nuclear weapons research before the Nazis built an atomic bomb. The following year, Roosevelt established the Uranium Committee, a program tasked with researching atomic fission of uranium. Many well-known scientists were part of the committee, including Lyman Briggs, Harold Urey, Arthur Compton, and Ernest Lawrence. Through rigorous testing and experimentation, the committee concluded that isotopes uranium-235 and plutonium-239 would be the ideal fuel sources to sustain a nuclear reaction. On November 1, 1939, they recommended the U.S. government obtain a supply of uranium oxide and fund research for isotope separation. After isolating enough of U-235, the committee calculated its critical mass, the smallest amount of matter to produce a chain reaction. They then found out how fast the neutron needed to be fired to trigger fission. With most of the scientific nuances discovered, the project was passed on to the United States Army Corps of Engineers in 1942. Research continued in other facilities around the country, codenamed Manhattan District. Among these research facilities were Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Richland, Washington. The theoretical physicist Robert Oppenheimer oversaw the rest of the program. Oppenheimer was a genius who had a taste for Hindu scripture. He taught himself how to read 8 languages, and he studied at 6 colleges. When World War II began in 1939, he held 2 full physics professorships. Oppenheimer was only 38 when assigned to oversee the Manhattan Project. For 2 years under his direction, a team of 3,500 scientists worked on constructing the bomb. On July 16, 1945, at Los Alamos, the test bomb, known as the Gadget, was detonated. When Oppenheimer witnessed the test, he recalled a Hindu passage.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
A month later, the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. The bomb, known as Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima, and Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. At least 185,000 people died. Entertainment in Japan began to tackle new themes, such as the consequences of nuclear weapons and war. A prime example of this is 1954's Godzilla, a film about a fire-breathing behemoth that terrorizes Japan after an atomic bomb awakens it. Many argue that the kaiju genre was Japan anthropomorphizing the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered to the United States, and World War II ended less than a month later. America celebrated victory. And why wouldn't they? The United States had outsized the rest of the globe and won the war because of it. The US was on top of the world, and everyone had a happy ending, right? Not exactly. News of Russia detonating their first atomic bomb quickly reached the US. When one war ends, a new Cold War begins.
He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must learn to